On March 19, 1945, 50 miles off the coast of Honshu, Japan, the steel deck of USS Franklin trembled beneath the feet of Lieutenant Commander Joseph T. O'Callaghan. The Catholic chaplain, known as Father O'Callaghan, had been awake since 0400 hours celebrating Mass for the early watch in the dimly lit wardroom. As dawn broke over the vast Pacific, he stood near the island superstructure observing ordnancemen load massive Tiny Tim rockets onto F-4U Corsair fighters. Each 11-foot-long rocket packed 500 pounds of high explosive designed to crack open battleship armor. These experimental weapons had never seen combat. Franklin would become the first carrier to launch them against the Japanese mainland. Unbeknownst to O'Callaghan, in less than 3 hours his ship would transform into a floating inferno defying every prediction of naval destruction. Naval architects had calculated that the damage Franklin endured would sink any carrier within minutes. She lost 87 men in an instant, more casualties than any American warship survived from a single attack. Her flight deck turned into a holocaust of exploding ammunition rockets and burning aircraft. The hangar deck became a furnace with temperatures soaring to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, melting aluminum and igniting everything flammable. Yet, against all odds, against every law of naval warfare and material science, Franklin refused to sink. The secret to her survival was embedded in her very bones, constructed 5 years earlier in a Virginia shipyard by innovative builders whose ideas were dismissed as impossible by skeptics. Special treatment steel, extensive compartmentalization, and redundant systems formed the backbone of this resilience, turning potential catastrophe into a testament to engineering foresight that saved thousands. The morning of March 19th began with routine yet tense atmosphere of combat operations on the edge of the Japanese home waters. Task Force 58 had been pounding targets around Kyushu and Honshu for 3 consecutive days, softening defenses in preparation for the April 1st invasion of Okinawa. Franklin, operating as part of Task Group 58.2 under Rear Admiral Ralph E. Davidson, had ventured closer to Japan than any American carrier before. At just 50 miles from the coast, she placed herself well within range of land-based Japanese aircraft posing constant threat from kamikazes and dive bombers. Captain Leslie E. Gares, who assumed command in November 1944, was known for his aggressive tactics, earning the nickname Custer among crew. Some whispered he took unnecessary risks pushing the ship into harm's way, but the mission demanded boldness. Operating closer allowed more sorties, longer time over targets, and greater impact on enemy airfields and defenses critical for upcoming amphibious assault on Okinawa. At dawn, Franklin launched her first Strike Wave 12 Corsair fighters, and 16 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers roared off the deck targeting airfields near Kobe to suppress Japanese air power and prevent counterattacks. The second strike was already spotted on deck, 31 aircraft with engines warming, propellers turning, and pilots running final checks in cockpits ready for launch. The flight deck was a meticulously choreographed dance of controlled danger where every movement mattered amid the roar of engines and smell of fuel. Ordnance men wrestled the bulky experimental Tiny Tim rockets onto wing pylons, securing them tightly while aviation gasoline trucks finished topping off fuel tanks, adding volatile load to already risky setup. Below, in the hangar deck, 22 more aircraft waited, 16 fully fueled and 5 armed with bombs and rockets for the next cycle, packed tightly. This was the most vulnerable moment in carrier operations, hundreds of tons of volatile aviation gasoline and ordnance exposed across 2 decks where a single spark could trigger unimaginable chain reaction of explosions, devastating the entire task force. Precisely at 0708 hours, a lone Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber emerged from the cloud cover at 2,500 feet, slipping through defenses undetected. The ship's radar failed to detect it amid the clutter of returning American aircraft, creating false echoes and confusion. The combat air patrol, focused on threats from other directions, overlooked the intruder approaching from low altitude through gaps. Anti-aircraft gun crews tracking multiple contacts had mere seconds to react, their guns unable to traverse fast enough before the dive committed. The Japanese pilot's identity remains unknown, lost to history and fog of war. He had perhaps 30 seconds from pushover into dive to impact a brief window of decision under intense pressure. In that time, he released two 550-pound semi-armor-piercing bombs with devastating accuracy, piercing vital areas, then vanished back into the clouds before anyone could track or engage him effectively. He executed the dream of every Japanese aviator, a flawless attack run against an American carrier corps of the fleet. Whether he survived to report his success or fell to flak remains unknown, but his bombs changed everything in an instant. The first bomb struck the flight deck centerline 15 feet forward of the island superstructure, punching through the 3-inch wooden planking like paper, then through the steel deck below, detonating deep in the hangar amid parked planes. The blast wave, traveling at 26,000 feet per second, tore through the densely packed aircraft like a giant's fist ripping wings' fuselages apart in violent shredding. Aviation gasoline ignited instantly, creating a massive fireball that engulfed everything within 50 feet, turning metal to slag and air to plasma. The explosion launched the No. 1 elevator, a 4-ton steel platform 60 feet by 34 feet, rocketing upward out of its shaft like a missile propelled by overpressure wave. It soared 400 feet into the air, tumbled end over end, uncontrolled, then crashed back onto the deck, shattering into fragments that shredded aircraft crew and deck alike in secondary carnage. Secondary explosions rippled across the hangar as fuel tanks ruptured and ordnance began cooking off in chain reactions, spreading fire rapidly through confined space filled with fuel lines and ammo. The second bomb struck aft amid the 31 aircraft warming for launch, detonating on contact with the flight deck, igniting an instant holocaust of destruction. 31 fuel tanks exploded in rapid sequence, each detonation adding fuel to the fireball that rolled across the deck like a breaking wave of flame, consuming planes, men, and equipment. Men on nearby ships felt their vessels rock from the shockwave transmitted through water, air, and hulls. Sailors were knocked off their feet on destroyers 1,000 yards away. The blast felt like distant thunder, shaking decks. On Franklin's flight deck, pilots trapped in cockpits had no escape. Some managed to unbuckle and dive overboard into churning sea. Others burned alive, their screams drowned in the deafening roar of exploding fuel ammunition and rockets turning deck into vision of hell. The critical next 30 seconds determined whether Franklin would live or die, hanging in balance of chaos and crew response. In the hangar, where the first bomb detonated, fires spread with terrifying speed. Gasoline from ruptured tanks flowed across the steel deck, seeping into ventilation ducts everywhere. The still operational ventilation system pumped burning gasoline vapor throughout the ship, distributing flames to distant compartments, amplifying damage. Heat triggered ready ammunition. 20mm rounds cooked off their tracer streaks, cutting through smoke like deadly fireflies piercing flesh. 40mm shells detonated with grenade-like force-hurling shrapnel that cut down men trying to reach firefighting gear, turning rescue into peril for brave souls. Then the tiny TIM rockets began igniting untested in such conditions, adding unpredictability. These 1,300-pound experimental weapons had solid fuel motors burning at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 6 seconds, generating 50,000 pounds of thrust immense power. At 0711, 3 minutes after the attack, the first one shrieked to life, shooting horizontally across the deck like a meteor trailing fire and destruction. It punched through the half-inch steel plating of the island structure and exploded starboard, showering the deck with molten metal and fragments, wounding more. More rockets followed screaming in random directions, some plunging into the sea, others smashing bulkheads, one bisecting a gun crew before exploding in the water, another rocketing full length of deck, vanishing over bow. The deck became chaotic killing ground where death came from fire explosions or unpredictable paths of weapons meant to destroy enemy ships, not their own carrier. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Jerica Jr., the ship's navigator, was in his sea cabin below the bridge when the bombs hit shaking structure. A 1930 Naval Academy graduate who served as intelligence officer on USS Hornet during the Doolittle raid, Jerica recognized the double thump of bombs, followed by rolling secondary explosions signaling disaster unfolding. He grabbed his life jacket and battle helmet, rushing topside through smoke-filled passages, dodging debris. The sight haunted him forever. After two-thirds of the flight deck, a sea of flame with aircraft exploding, some launching into the ocean as engines ignited at full throttle, propellers screaming wildly. Wooden deck planking burned fiercely, holes gaped from penetrations large enough to swallow men afire, running jumping list to starboard at 5 degrees and worsening rapidly under weight of damage. Black smoke boiled from hangar openings, tiny Tims streaking unpredictably, adding to terror and confusion. WWII organized damage control from stunned survivors, rallying them amid panic and loss. The forward deck, relatively clear, he aimed to create a firebreak, abandoning the irretrievable aftersection, a heartbreaking choice leaving wounded behind, but focusing scarce resources forward to save what could be saved of the ship. Deep in the engineering spaces, 4 decks below, Lieutenant Junior Grade Donald Arthur Gary stood watch in the forward engine room, feeling every shudder. A 1943 Naval Academy graduate aboard less than 4 months, including a prior kamikaze hit that killed 56, Gary heard the roar echoing through hull and acted decisively. His priority was clear: keep the plant running to give ship fighting chance against odds. Franklin had been making 25 knots via 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, feeding 4 turbines delivering maximum steam to props. Explosions ruptured fuel lines, fractured steam lines, and ventilation pumped toxic smoke below, threatening suffocation for all below. In conventional ships, crews faced grim choice: abandon and lose all power, or stay and suffocate in darkness without light. Essex-class compartmentalization offered third-path isolation from widespread damage above. Gary ordered ducts sealed immediately, emergency air bottles distributed to crew, then assessed damage systematically: 2 forward boilers still operational, 3 turbines functional, electrical reroutable via ring main, bypassing burned sections creatively. He chose to maintain power essential for pumps, ventilation, steering, and ultimately propulsion. A moving ship had options. A dead hulk drifting did not vulnerable to subs. Crew near collapse from smoke infiltration. Gary innovated under extreme pressure jury, rigging the CO2 fire suppression system with high-pressure air bottles to create positive ventilation, forcing smoke out through sealed ducts effectively. Hands trembling from hypoxia, lack of oxygen, he manually rerouted valves and pipes, converting fire system into life support mechanism. Finally, he opened the valve, pressure-built hatches held firm, smoke vented, and air cleared enough to breathe, creating breathable sanctuary amid ship-wide death and destruction, allowing engineers to continue vital work without interruption.